Many of you know that one of my favorite things to watch are Westerns. I got a great picture for you here. One of my favorite Westerns. If you can name all three of those characters, you are no longer a spring chicken. I don't know what it is. I would have loved to have been a cowboy. And I love to watch Westerns. And there's many things that make up a good Western. But in a lot of them, there is a lot of times the showdown, and it's not with guns, it's with the gambler. I have a great picture of the premium gambler here. And, there's this, they could just do a whole Western theme, hardly any guns, but there's always tension around the gambling table. And it's not necessarily somebody cheating. It could be a card up the sleeve. But usually what happens is the movie kind of goes back and forth, and, you win some, you lose some. You got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to... Anyhow. If you didn't get that, just ask somebody who's a little bit older. They'll explain it to you. But usually somewhere at the peak of the movie, the peak of the experience, there's a time when all of a sudden someone will say, I'm all in. And they will push their chips, everything they have, their whole stack to the middle. And of course, there's one other person, it's usually the bad guy, who then pushes his chips all to the middle. Again, it's that point we're saying, this movie's going to either end really badly, or the good guy's finally going to win, because they're putting all their chips in. They're all in. And the movie's pretty good up to that point, but that's what makes it. And that's what makes the movie. And the truth is, a lot of movies that way, even if they're not Westerns, even if they don't have gambling, a lot of movies, the peak of the movie comes when someone says there's no turning back, right? When Rambo finally goes in and it's like, do or die. Or he finally declares his undying love for her, and she's either going to receive him or reject him, right? There is something about that step of saying, I'm all in. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today as we kind of are getting towards the end of our dream series. We're talking about what it means to dream, to replace our vision for life, our dreams, our will with God's. Replace our agenda with God's mission. Mission impossible, but it's not the impossible mission that makes it impossible. It's God's mission, and so He makes the impossible possible. But He calls us to do this. And we've talked about the last few weeks, dream. The first step is to dream, is to capture God's heart for what it means to be a different kind of people, to be light, if you would, in the darkness. And then the second week, we talked about reconciliation. Remember, the R stands for reconciliation. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The R goes for reconciliation. And that part of God's plan for our lives is that we become ambassadors, representatives of Him, specifically in the area of forgiveness. Not morals, not religiosity, not even going to church, but of His wonderful, awesome grace and forgiveness. Being reconciled back in relationship with God. And then last week, we talked about what's really close to God's heart is issues of equality and justice. As a matter of fact, remember we looked at the scriptures, even the Old Testament, which makes a big point saying, all this religious activity is nothing if you are void of caring for the marginalized. If you're not someone who's a champion for treating people fairly, equally, and for justice, you really don't have my heart. And that's why we talked so about care ministry and that wonderful opportunity that we have in that class. Well, today we're going to talk about the A. As you probably well guessed, you've been around church a while. It's all in. It's all in. God dreams of a people that are all in. That if you would, spiritually, metaphorically speaking, push their chips to the middle and go, okay, here you go. Here you go. And there's many places that we can see this in the scripture, but we're going to go to Hebrews. We're starting Hebrews chapter 12 today. So if you have a Bible, if you open up to Hebrews chapter 12. If not, there's a Bible in front of you. You can just grab that and turn to Hebrews chapter 12. It's the blue Bible. If somebody gets there, let me know the page number. 852? Page 852 if you use one of the blue Bibles in front of you. You can also just listen along. That's fine as well. This verse says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, here it is, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us, and run with perseverance the race marked out for us. This is basically a challenge here, saying, based on the past, and we'll kind of look at this, what we need to do is we need to throw off everything. Now, in this case, rather than throwing it to the middle, it's a race thing. It's throwing off everything that might hinder you, right? That easily entangles you, and run free, run unencumbered the race that God has called you to. In other words, if you're gonna run, right? You can't wear a jacket, can't wear your flip-flops, you can't, you don't run with a backpack and all this stuff, right? You get as little as, still modest, but as little as possible, right? I had to throw that in there. Unencumbered. If you're gonna run a race well, you're all in. And in essence, that is what he's saying here. But what I want to kind of look at is what leads up to this. What leads up to this. So we're going to back up in the previous chapter. He starts talking about, this is known as the kind of the Hall of Fame, if you would. The Hall of Fame chapter of faith, of all the folks that did incredible things throughout the Hebrew Scriptures and being commended for it. And I'm going to start in verse 6. In verse 6 it says this, and without faith it is impossible to please God. Now think about that. Without faith it's impossible to please God. The Scriptures are filled with a lot of things, actually 622 different commandments in the Hebrew Scriptures of things that you ought to do or not to do, right? Plus you have Jesus who raised the bar. He thought those 622 were tough standard. Jesus raised the standards even higher. There's a lot in the Scriptures, but this one thing, this is the only thing that it really says, if you're going to please God, it is impossible unless you have this. So faith's a huge issue. Faith, hope, and love really are the hugest issues. But in this case, we're going to focus in on faith. So without faith, it's impossible to please God. Why? Because anyone who comes to him, being God, must believe that he exists. That makes sense. And that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. In other words, in order to have faith in God, two things must be true about you. You must, A, believe God exists. Obviously, if you don't believe God doesn't exist, you're not going to trust him. And any of you who live in the Silicon Valley know what that looks like, right? But second, there's a second part to this. Because I believe there's a lot of people who believe God exists, but they really don't believe this second part, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Because in order to go all in, think about it, in order to go all in, you got to believe I'm going to win this hand. If you don't believe you're going to win this hand, if you don't believe there's a better than 50-50 chance, actually if you don't believe there's not a 90% chance that you're going to win this hand, you're not going all in, especially if that's all you have. You got to absolutely believe with a pretty good certainty that you're going to win before you go all in. And you're not going to extend faith in meaningful ways unless you truly believe that if you go all in, God is going to bless you. Make sense? And that's a fundamental, if you would, that's kind of a prerequisite. Faith is the prerequisite to being all in. It's a prerequisite to what he talks about later in terms of running the race and leaving everything behind. You must have or develop, is probably a more of an appropriate term, faith. And then he kind of gives some faith examples of this faith, starting in verse 7. It says, by faith Noah, right? He's already talked about pre-Noah before verse 6. He started with the creation and Abel and Enoch and whatnot. So now he's starting with Noah. By faith Noah, when he's warned about things not yet seen, like a huge flood and building a boat in the middle of the desert. Ridiculous. In holy fear, he built an ark to save his family, though there was no proof that doing so was a wise decision. By his faith, he condemned the world. In other words, it contrasts his faith that he believed and the world that didn't believe in God, and became heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. He was made right with God, not because of what he did, but because he believed God. Even though he had reason not to believe God in terms of human experience. Verse 8, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go a place he would later receive as an inheritance. So Abraham lived in a time where, right now we're very mobile. So it's still a big deal if God were to call you to the East Coast. It would take some faith. Sorry. But nothing compared to a day and age when your whole family history, your whole economics was tied to the land and ownership. And usually if you went to another place, it's not like you could just sell and buy, because the land was all owned by people who had lived there for centuries. And so for Abraham to leave, when God said, go to this place I'm going to give you, for him to leave his home is an unheard of thing at that time. It's pure craziness. But he obeyed and went even though he did not know where, he didn't even know where he was going. And of course, because he was a man, he wouldn't stop and ask for directions. I put that one in for you, dear. By faith, verse 9, by faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents. He was established, had a nice home, but at that point he lived in tents. As did Isaac and Jacob, who came after him, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he, being Abraham, was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architecture and builder is God. Now, what he's talking about isn't the city that Jerusalem, which would be built in the promised land. He's talking about the new Jerusalem. He's talking about ultimately Abraham left and did what he did because he believed in the long run he would spend eternity with the God that he had a relationship with. And so he went all in. Verse 11, by faith Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. They believed, even in their old age, really emphasis here is Sarah, not Abraham, that they were going to have a child. They were almost 100. And so from this one man, he, as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the sea. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. Now, the interesting thing is they did receive some of the things they were promised. Abraham, for instance, received a son. He says they only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, and they admitted that they were aliens and strangers, here's the key, on earth. What did they not receive? They did not receive that closeness, that completion of being with God in eternity, the new heaven, the new earth. They didn't receive that. They lived their lives. They followed God by faith, believing that that was going to come, even though they never realized it. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return, go back to their old home. Instead, they were longing for a better country, and here it is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So as he goes through these stories, he says, these folks instilled incredible faith. They got incredible results. But ultimately, they were working for a reward they had yet really to receive. The reward wasn't about what came in this life. The reward was about eternity with a God that they loved, that they wanted to walk with, for the rest of their eternal lives, have a relationship with. I'm going to skip to verse 32. He kind of continues the story, and he kind of goes through the Hebrew scriptures. But in 32, he just kind of gives us a summary. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. And then he begins to summarize, and we're going to go there. But before he begins to summarize, I want to point out two people here, Gideon and Barak. The reason I want to point these two out, because these guys are in the Hall of Fame. These two also didn't just, when God said go, go. Gideon's story, God comes to Gideon and says to him, hey, Gideon, I want you to go fight an army. It's impossible to win. I understand it's mission impossible, but this is what I desire from you. And Gideon goes, cool. I just want to make sure that this is really you. So he puts out a fleece. You might have heard the idea of putting out a fleece. And one time he wants the fleece wet and everything around it dry. And the other time, the second time, he wants everything around it dry and the fleece wet. And he gets that. And he goes and he recruits 300,000. But God says that's too many. He gets them down to 30,000. God says, I think, somewhere around there. I'm doing pastor math, so it's probably big numbers. Ultimately, he ends up with 300. 300, and they surround him, and he's a little nervous because they're surrounding an army of hundreds of thousands. And once again, God says, sneak down the camp. He sneaks down the camp, and he hears the enemy talking about how they had a dream that Gideon came and destroyed them. And then with 300, they went to battle, and they won the battle. But it took him several times to go, I want to have faith, but I just want to make sure that, I want to check ID, if you would. You might have heard me say that a time or two. If God speaks to me, that's fine, I'll do it, but I want to check ID, make sure it's him. Barak, if some of you might remember this story, God comes to him and also tells him to go into battle. But he refuses to go unless Deborah, the judge, someone he knows that listens to God, goes with him. And he loses some of his blessing because of that. But yet they both show up here. That's the beautiful thing. They both show up here. Because God understands it's a process. It's not just the person who... Now, God loves the person who just does it. But usually the person who just does it have a history where they've made mistakes and didn't do it in the past. And you just get that one point where they did. Us preachers are phenomenal for that, right? We always tell you the stories that we actually obeyed God and something wonderful happened, right? That's because you want us to teach shortly. Because if I told you all the stories that led up to the successful story, we'd be here all day. Then he goes on in verse 33, who through faith conquered, now notice, here's all the great things that happened. Who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained that was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Amen, hallelujah. All you need to do is have faith, and great things will happen. It's right there in the Bible. And that's true. They had faith and great things happened. That is part of faith. God does amazing things. Sometimes you win. But every scripture, you've heard me say, needs to be taken in context. So let's continue reading. Women received, verse 35, women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others also who extended faith, were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and floggings, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned and they were sawed in two. They were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and in holes and in the ground. Wow. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a list you could sign up for one or the other, right? I know where I'd sign up. But the truth is that what he's teaching here is that sometimes when people go all in, it's a lot tougher than it would have been if they didn't. Why back the truck up? Because fundamentally they believed that God existed and he rewards people even if their reward doesn't come through their 401k now, through winning the lottery now, through having that one special person that completes them now. So I just want to emphasize this, because there's a lot of folks out there who sound really good, and they will tell you, if you just let go, if you just have enough faith, God will bless you. And guess what? That is half the story. Yes, He will. But sometimes He blesses you with the opportunity to show how much He is real and loves others by laying your life down and suffering for Him. And now you know the rest of the story. And this brings us then, verse 39. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. For God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us we would be made perfect. There is a quote I came across. I really like this quote. It goes like this. I think there are a lot of people in a lot of churches who think they're following Jesus, but the reality is they've invited Jesus to follow them. And I think that's where we got to be careful about this faith thing always being a blessing. Because that usually is a gospel that says, if you do the right things, then Jesus will fall behind you and make everything good. And the scriptures, I just don't see that in the Bible. I mean, yes, there's a verse that if you read that says that God blessed them in this moment. But every single one of the disciples who prayed for somebody and they were healed, that person eventually died of something. And every single disciple who was blessed by God lost a head and was killed for believing and following God and telling others about His Son Jesus. Every single one of them. There is no record of any of the 11 disciples ending their life comfortable in retirement because they loved God so much that He blessed them. Now, there's nothing wrong with ending your life comfortable in retirement. That's what God calls you to do. But to claim it, that God owes you that, means you're asking God to follow you rather than the other way around. I know this would have been a good day to stay home. Verse 12 here. It says, therefore, so the therefore is based on the chapter we just went through, based on the fact that it's impossible to please God without faith, based on the fact that those in the Hebrew Scriptures that are commended, that are made righteous, are do so not necessarily by their actions, but by their faith, that they believed inherently that God would bless them, sometimes in this life, but definitely when we're separated from this flesh in the eternal life. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, people that we're surrounded by a cloud of folks that will say, it's worth it. Yes, I suffered. Yes, some of us died. Yes, it was hard leaving and giving this up and saying no to that, but it is worth it. God is good. And since we're surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses, then it says, because of that, because God has been so faithful in the past, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us. Let us go all in. You want to experience life? You want to not just hear about miracles, you want to experience miracles? Do you want to just not hear about how people took a step and they gave up something that most people wouldn't, and then God came in and used that either to bless them or, more importantly, to bless others in a way that you want, man, I wish my life meant that. Do you want that? Then go all in. And run with perseverance. I love that. Perseverance means it understands that when you start running, you're going to be happy you're running. Right? And then after the first, in my case, 100 feet, you're ready to be done. right? After the first 2 weeks of volunteering to teach the second graders, or to show up in church and greet people as they come in, or to volunteer in the boxing program. After 2 weeks, all the excitement of I'm going to make a difference, this is going to be great, I'm going to impact the kids, is wore off. It's wore off. And what's left? Perseverance. And run the race, what? That's marked out for us. In other words, God has got a plan for you and I. And this is what I know about that plan. It's going to take you to push some important things to you in the middle. It's impossible to experience God. It's impossible to receive God's best for you. It's impossible to please God without faith. And it's impossible to exercise faith without risking the things you care about. It goes against the very nature of faith. That's James's argument, by the way, in his book in the Bible, where he says faith without works is dead. He's not saying that it's faith, you either have faith or you work. That's not what he's saying. He's saying inherently in the definition of faith is that you act on that faith. If you don't act on that faith, it's not faith in the first place. God's dream for us is that we push the chips of our life into the middle. That we take our career and we say, I got this plan. It's going to take me places that I want to go. It's going to pay the bills so that I'm secure. I was listening to a financial gal as I was kind of going through the channels, and she said, what did she say? The purpose of money. She was wanting to sound wise. And she said, the purpose of money is not for pleasure. She says, the purpose of money is security. Now, that sounds smart. That's why we want money. But here's the thing. If we're secure in ourselves, we're not dependent on God. So God would say that the purpose of money is to serve me. And serving me sometimes means you have to believe that I'm more secure than your bank account. And sometimes God says, are you willing to put that in the middle? Now, there is usually a good ending to this story. For most people who push that into the middle, God sustains them. And as a matter of fact, the Bible does promise that He will provide food, shelter, the basic clothes, the basic necessities. Above and beyond that, there are no guarantees. But usually, if you hear folks who said, I didn't want to give, I was tight-fisted, and God got hold of my heart, and I gave Him this little, and I gave Him a little bit more, their story is, and God just kept giving me more stuff to give Him. But the biggest blessing isn't, I only had $1,000, and I was willing to give 100 of it, and now I have $3 million. You need to do the same, right? That's not the message. That's not the message. The message is, I had $3 million, I had 1,000, I had $3. And God called me to move. And when I did that, I was free. I wasn't bound by worry. I wasn't bound by my agenda. I was free to run the race that God called me to do. And for the first time, I felt alive. I wasn't secure, but I felt alive. I felt life. For some of us, it's giving God more of our time. It's pushing that there's something in your life. Could be a video game, could be an addiction, could be a hobby, could be just watching TV. That you're like, God has this, but I don't. This is where I recharge. This is what I don't want to give God this. Now, I got nothing against any of those things. I have all those things, including the addictions. All right. And there's something wrong with addiction. Don't get me wrong there. But in terms of just watching TV, there's nothing. But there's some of those things that we're like, God, you can have this except this one thing. Right? It's kind of like telling God, you can have anything on the table except my cyanide. Now, it doesn't feel like cyanide to you, but when you hold on to something, it is death. It's the thing that keeps you tethered. It's the thing that keeps you from running. It's the thing that keeps you from going all in. This can happen with relationships too. I'll give you a tough one. This is a tough one for me. Giving God my kids. I mean, I have a plan for my kids' life. The reason we had 4 is because one of them's got to pay off and help me in my retirement. And we want them to get a great education and get good Silicon Valley jobs and on like everyone else, right? But what I got to be careful that I don't not only tether myself, but tether my kids. Because God may just say, hey, I want to free you up to pour out your life in something where you're going to be poor for the rest of your life. Where do they are their next Mother Teresa? She sure didn't leave a lot behind monetarily, did she? But on the other hand, she sure left a lot behind. And by the way, that's somebody else that you should read her journal. Mother Teresa struggled a lot. But she kept faithful because deep down, even though she struggled, even though Mother Teresa at times was saying, God, where are you? Deep down, you also see in her journal, she believed there was a God who loved her, and he would eventually reward her and reveal himself fully to her. That's what I want my kids, that's the kind of life I want my kids to learn, to live. But there are some relationships we may have to let go. There's some leisure time, hobbies and stuff, maybe not completely, that you might have to let go. There's some forgiveness that you might have to give. That's a scary one, isn't it? That's a scary one. But it is the heart of what's all in. So on the back of your handout there, the notes for this in the middle of your bulletin, if you got one, here's my dream. My rewriting of this verse. This is God's dream, if you would, for us in my words. God's dream is for his people to follow in the footsteps of those faithful pioneers who blazed the way. Have faith. Strip down to what is really important. Say no to self. Give all to him. And start running the path of true life. He has prepared for their best. And never, ever quit. Again, let me just read that one more time. This is God's dream. He has a dream for his people that they will follow in the footsteps of those faithful pioneers who blazed the way. Have faith. Strip down to what is really important. Say no to self. Give all to him. And start running the path of true life that God has prepared for your best. It will be life that is truly life. You may not win most likely everyone wants to be like you in the Silicon Valley award, but you will be I wish I was peaceful and my life at the end had the kind of meaning that person had kind of life. And never, ever quit, because it will get hard. If the Bible gives one clear message, after follow God, right after that it says, and persevere. And never quit. And run to the end. Because it's going to get hard. So kind of like we've done with some other things, I kind of wanted you to see a personal example of this. So is Katie here yet? Or is she still in the youth? I'm here. Nope. I'll look right over you. Come on up. Welcome home.
Thank you.
Sorry, I hadn't had a chance to see her yet. All right. This is Katie Green, y'all. Most of you know her, but if you're new, Katie Green is one of our members and loved members of Trinity Church, but she's been away for us for a little over a year now. And so for those folks who don't know you or know what God's done last year, could you just give us a synopsis of what you've done over the last year?
Okay. So after I graduated high school, I decided not to go to college and to do something else, and I ended up finding a program that is similar to a mission trip but different. And so basically I lived in West Africa in a country called Côte d'Ivoire. A lot of people, or Ivory Coast is how you say it in English, although the official name is Côte d'Ivoire. And so I lived there in a host family and worked with a church there until July, until I came back here. So yeah, been in West Africa.
And we had this discussion before, and if you guys remember, I told her she's crazy. Because the year after high school, if you take a gap year, you're supposed to play, right? You're supposed to work just enough to surf and have money to spend on Friday night and whatnot. And she goes to Africa to serve for a year, and that's just crazy. So, what was it worth it?
Yes.
Why? Why do you say that? Other than the fact that you're supposed to say that, because we're in church.
It's not like it was the only thing that could have been worth it. I think, you don't have to go to West Africa for life to be worth it. But just knowing the people I know there, because I didn't know anyone in West Africa before I went, and just knowing like my host family there and having lived with them, it's amazing to have more people to care about and that care about you and teach you things, and they taught me stuff I never learned in the first 18 years of my life. It's just stuff that you can't forget easily. Yeah. And
what were some of the lessons that God taught you through that experience? I know there's a lot, but just give us a few. And remember, you're just talking to family here. All right, so don't worry.
Yeah. I'll share two, but one of the first lessons I had to learn going there was as an 18-year-old girl living in the US and other places, but I was always raised in Western culture. So 18-year-old girls don't have to work that much in Western culture. And then when you go to West Africa, 18-year-old girls do a lot of work. And it was hard because I was bad at it, because I've never cooked like stuff over open fires or anything, or like cut without a cutting board. I cut my hands a lot. But they work so hard and they don't complain. Like it was never a question in some of the other girls in my youth group's mind that they would have to sweep the whole church every Saturday night and then wipe it all down, not with a mop, like with a cloth, like wiping it like this. And then they wipe down all the chairs. And then if the men want to have a conference, they'll cook all the food and clean up after it. It was never a question in their head that wasn't a role they could fill for people. And for me, and I think not only me as an 18-year-old girl, I never thought that was a role I should have to fill. Being here, I thought like, we can pay someone to do that. But they just do it, and they don't do it like, oh, we can skip under that chair and no one sits there. Like they clean everything, and it's an amazing testimony to be a servant like that. That taught me a lot, to serve like that. And then the second thing I learned is the best thing you can do for yourself. And since I was there as kind of like a missionary role, because they're like, why is a white person in West Africa? But so the best way you can be an example to anyone else, be a witness to Christ, and the best thing you can do for yourself is really to seek God. And I learned that because, when days get hard, it really is the best thing you can do for yourself, is seek God with all your heart. And then that's the best way to be an example to anyone, because that's what you hope they should be doing one day, is seeking God with all their heart. And so that was a good lesson to learn. Learned that with a lot of things over a lot of time, but.
And then I know, I'm going to put this down so folks can see over there. Do you have any experience with being tempted to quit?
Well, in all honesty, it was a little easier for me not to be tempted to quit, because I had teammates on this trip. Only one actually lived in the same city as me, but they all came from one hometown where their family was, so they could just think like, I want to go home. And I had some teammates who actually seriously considered going. Some went home actually too, but like God was nice to me. I don't really have a one home place, and like my parents are now in Thailand, so it was a little easier for me to think like, I don't want to go home because I don't know where I'd go.
Well, here, of course.
But I don't have a house here anymore. Yeah. So I mean, I have lots of houses that other people own and invite me to. But it was in the little things, when you'd like this is the thing. In West Africa, they don't really, personal space isn't really a thing. So I did have my own room. But if you're in your room, they'll like come and knock on it and be like, what are you doing? And if you don't have a good reason to begin, there's like no good reason unless you're sick and like lying on the bed. They'll be like, come out, we're gonna do something. And so some days I was just overwhelmed and I wanted to be in my room and like pretend I'm sleeping. That sometimes works too. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they come in, they're like, get out of here, we're doing something. So it was definitely on day-to-day basis I wanted to stay in my room and like read a book or something, and I'm trying to give myself reasons why this is like the best thing to do when it probably isn't. And it's not, I don't know if you can learn that and just know it for life. I think you have to reteach yourself over and over again, like, okay, I need to not give up. I need to keep trying. And I'd say there was really great examples of other people who didn't give up. I think God really blessed me with my community. There was people on my team who felt like giving up when I didn't, so I could help them, and then I felt like giving up and they didn't. So, you know, it was really great to have a community. I think that's the thing that helped me not give up, is that we helped each other.
That is key. And this is going to be an unsophisticated question, but you mentioned in one of your emails something that God taught you about liking whatever you're fed. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Would you explain that? They don't know the context, so you have to give the context too.
Yeah, so, well, the funny thing is, right before I went to West Africa, they told us this one inspirational quote where they said, where he leads, like where God leads, I will follow. What he feeds me, I will swallow. So I went into it knowing that, but so it wasn't so much that their food was really strange flavored, because to me, when I taste some Asian foods, they taste like, whoa, why would anyone think of eating these flavors? They're so strange. Their food is like, doesn't have too much flavor, but they eat like the same 4 things all the time. And so, like you eat rice that's like drowned in watery, oily sauce. And then you eat like, it's corn jello kind of. You like turn corn into powder and then you make jello out of it. And then you eat like wild yams sort of thing. And then, and you eat that for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And one week, I think I had rice for just like 3 days straight, like breakfast, lunch, dinner, breakfast, lunch, dinner. And sometimes the sauce they put it in will change slightly, but sometimes you're just using up the last sauce. So for a whole month, I think I prayed every meal, not like, thank you for this food, but like, can I eat this food? Can I finish this food? Can I keep it down? And that was really hard. And they serve you lots because they're really happy that you're here and they want you to like their food. So they give you like this huge plate. And I don't even eat a lot anyway. So it was really hard. It was really hard. I think it was one part of me not feeling very happy there for a long time, because usually here, meals are happy times. Like you get to eat. But it was really, really hard. And one of the coolest things was, well, so the first month, I just didn't like food. The second month, I could just eat it. I stopped thinking, like, it was just something you had to do in the day. And by the third month, I finally started liking food. But I remember the first day, I think it's the first day of my whole life, I prayed the generic prayer, like, thanks God for this food. And I meant it with, like, all my heart. I was, like, the most joy I ever felt in, like, thanking God for food I liked. Because I think I got, like, bread with cucumber cut up with vinegar sauce, but it's just so good compared to eating rice every day. And I didn't even want to eat it there because I just wanted to praise God for it. I was like, this is so cool. Like, I get cucumber today. And I don't think I've ever prayed in my life and been so happy for food. And it was good to learn that I don't have a right in life to food that I think is yummy. Like, God will feed me, but he didn't say, like, it's gonna be really yummy every time. And so it was good to learn I don't have a right to that, but when God will give it to you sometimes. And then you're like, it's great.
And then
throwing a party, yeah.
And it's a blessing.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the things
good.
too you were saying in that email is that you learned that you didn't like it at the beginning,
Yeah.
but by the end God had changed your.
Right now, I would eat any Ivorian food you give me. I'd be so happy to eat the food. I love their food now.
So I know that for many of us, and me included, one of our great fears, and they said this all the time when I was growing up. You're always worried that if you came to Jesus, he'd send you to Africa. And that saying just encapsulates, I have a plan for my life, and I don't mind the Jesus deal, but if I come to Jesus, he may change the plan for my life. And the worst thing at that time we could think of was Africa. But the truth is that this is what they're saying. When you go unfettered, at the beginning it is hard. Because you would never dream of yourself doing that thing, eating rice 3 meals a day for 3 days straight, let alone a month. But then all of a sudden, God does something in you, and what was unconscionable at the beginning now is enjoyable. Plus, you're doing God's work, which is even a bigger blessing than eating out at In-N-Out 3 meals a day, which would be my preference. So, awesome. Is there anything that I just neglected to ask you, but you really want to share, let our body know, or any last words of wisdom?
Well, one thing I want to say about, I don't know how helpful it is. I do want to share, because a lot of people have been wanting to know things, but they don't know when to corner me, and there's a lot of questions because I was there a long time. But I do want to have a dessert night next week, and I don't actually know if I'll do it Friday night or Sunday night because I have to ask Trinity when I can use the building. I haven't done that yet, so it's not done being figured out yet. But next week I do want to share more. So if people want to, feel free to ask me any questions too. You don't have to save them for that night. But I do want to share about more things, more stories, more pictures, share more so you guys can get a better feel of what my time was like in Côte d'Ivoire.
So we'll figure that out either Monday or Tuesday, and then we'll put it front and center on the webpage, so you guys will know what it is. Plus, it'll go out in the weekly email if you're signed up for that. Otherwise, you can just keep calling Katie to ask. Just I know you're going to tell everybody all this stuff later, but what's next?
So right now I am going to Point Loma Nazarene University, which is outside of San Diego a little bit. If you guys know Ellen Aslan, she is there. So I'm going there. Right now I'm signed up to have a biology major, and I don't know where that'll go. I don't know if I'll change majors, but in reference to Côte d'Ivoire, I really want to go back and visit. I don't know how or when, but my host mother gave birth to a baby 3 days after I left, so I never saw him. But I don't know, it would be okay, but it would be really sad if I never saw my host family and my friends again. So I want to go back or just, be praying for them. They have a lot of stuff that goes on in their lives, but otherwise, probably I will finish college and see where that leads me. I'm interested in missions, but missions as in whatever God's mission is, I want to do it.
Well, for those of you who don't know Katie's story, she shared with us before, her and her family were in the Philippines, and she had a heart for missions, and so they moved back to Sunnyvale so she could do missions at Fremont High School. And so you've been an example of that missions can be anywhere. And you're how old again?
19.
19 years old, and what a wonderful example, isn't she? Give her a hand. Now, we told mostly the highlights, right? There are some times, I'm sure, in all that Katie was a little human, and she didn't have the best attitude. I know there are times, if you talk to her folks at home, that she doesn't have the best attitude. And if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you the same thing about me. So this isn't a, hey, God gets a hold of you, one-time decision, and everything works out. But it is a message of, do you want to really live? Have faith and go all in. And it's also a message a little bit of, you need to grow up.